Hey guys, Becky here with Design Bundles, and I'm super excited to have you join me today because we have a really awesome Silhouette Studio tutorial. I am here to teach you all about weeding lines and weeding boxes. All right guys, so let's talk about weeding lines and weeding boxes. Now, these are two very important parts of using your software if weeding is something that you struggle with. Now, I don't mean that that is a negative thing. A lot of us struggle with weeding, and especially when you're looking at a design that takes up a good portion of vinyl. It's a larger decal. And I say this in relation to adhesive vinyl because that's what I struggle with the most. If I have a decal that is a full sheet, maybe it has a lot of little pieces. Hey, maybe it doesn't have very many little pieces. Maybe it's just the full sheet. And I'm always worried that it's going to stick back down on itself and ruin my design or ruin my whole sheet of vinyl. And then I'm going to have to start over. Now, luckily for me, adhesive vinyl isn't super expensive, but that kind of thing always happens to me when it's like the only sheet of that color that I have, right? It's never going to happen when I just have tons on hand. So weeding lines and weeding boxes really help with that aspect. And they also help you to save vinyl because it allows you to isolate the area where your design is located on the vinyl so that you can leave the rest of your vinyl intact. So that comes into play in particular with things like pattern vinyl, okay? Because pattern vinyl is hard to see where your design is, so it's harder to trim around the design. But if you set up a weeding box, then all you have to do is find the tip of that box, and then it will help you weed your design without having to trim it from the sheet. Okay, so lots of really good reasons. Weeding boxes is not something that you'll regret. Never in my life have I said, man, I wish I had not done a weeding box. But how many times have I said, man, I really wish I would have done a weeding box or weeding lines, okay? Now, when I say a weeding box, that is simply a box that's around your design. When I say weeding lines, those are lines that will run, I'm going to say through your design, but I don't mean in a literal sense, but it will run in and through the open areas of your design so that you can weed it easier and in smaller bite-sized pieces instead of taking on the whole design at one time. So we have two options. Now, Silhouette Studio does have an upgraded feature to where you can automatically add weeding boxes and weeding lines to your design. Unfortunately, it is only available at the business edition level, okay? So if you have business edition, that's really great news for you. If you don't have business edition, guess what? I still have really great news for you because there's a way to do it manually, all right? So let's go ahead and take a look at the automatic way to do this first, because ultimately it's going to be the easiest. But make sure you hang on till the end because there are certain designs that the automatic feature is not going to work very well. And it's actually, I prefer to do it manually. I have better luck when I do it manually. But that way, if you don't have the upgraded software, you can still participate. Okay, so lots of really good things. So if you come down here, a lot of people struggle to find these features. On your right-hand side toolbar, there's a little arrow down there at the bottom. And that is going to expand to give you more icons. And you want to open the Weed Settings panel. Okay? If you struggle with your icons, you can come up here to the panels on your main Silhouette Studio menu. And you can find it here as well. Down here it says Weed Lines. Now, automatic weed lines, you have a couple settings. You're going to have horizontal. Now, it does default to include only shapes on media. Okay, so you can choose if you want to do, that's probably a good default. I was just playing with that earlier. So probably leave that checked. So you have horizontal, you have vertical, which in this case, there are no vertical weeding lines because it cannot go all the way through to the design. You have the H and V, which is going to be horizontal and vertical. And then you have the recursive, which is actually going to come in between your individual letters. All right. Now you'll notice that it puts a box around the entire design. That's the weeding box that I was telling you about. You can also choose the level of padding that you have, depending on how close you want to butt up to the edges of your design. I don't usually leave it at 0. I usually have it here at the 0.125. But ultimately, this is more or less what you're looking for. Now, of course, if you have off, that's just going to be normal. But then you can select whether you want any of these features or none of these features. Okay. Now let's move this out of the way, and I'm going to show you this design. When I come in here and I say, okay, let's do horizontal weeding lines. Oh, okay, well, that's a box. Well, what about vertical? Oh, well, that's a box too. Okay, what about both? Well, I don't get anything there. Recursive, I don't get anything there either. Now, you may be asking me why. That is mainly because this design, you'll notice it's very close. These letters very much invade the space of the other letters and wording and the hearts, and it's just not really a clear-cut design where I can isolate, where the software rather can isolate certain parts of that. Now, if you have Business Edition and you come in here and the weed settings, the weed lines work for you, hey, have at it. I think that's fabulous. And, it definitely takes the manual part out of it. You can just let the software do it. If you're getting great settings, great, super awesome. Now, if you, like on this design, you do not have really great settings, that's okay, because we can do our own. Now, if I just want a weeding box, well, of course I can draw that manually, right? There we go. Now, depending on the type of design that I have, I may decide that my weeding box is too big and I don't want to lose that much material. I can actually create an offset, and then I can increase the size of my offset until it makes more sense. And then I have the same thing, except it's an actual part of or it actually hugs around the design instead of being a square box. So that part's up to you, but that is just a basic weeding box or weeding border, depending on how you look at it. Now let's talk about taking this one step farther and doing the actual weeding lines. What I'm going to do, I'm going to move this out of the way first of all. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to draw, and the largest part of my design, the crosshairs come in handy with this too, if you guys have Designer Edition or above. And I'm just going to draw a line and make sure that it spans the whole of my design from left to right. Now I'm going to put that bad boy up here. And I'm going to, now, I use keyboard shortcuts, so I'm going to hold down Control on my keyboard and hit the down arrow. That gives me a duplicate. And then, of course, I can also do that over here under the Replicate panel, and I can use these icons, duplicate. All right, so I give myself some boxes here. And you want it to be the size of your design, but remember I won't say the whole reason. One of the reasons that we like these weeding boxes is because they help us save material too. So let's group these together. I'm going to use Control G on my keyboard, group those together. And I'm just going to center my design. All right, now here's the fun part. All right, I'm going to make sure that my boxes are to the back. So you can either right click and choose send to back, or you can use these icons up here on the top right. And make sure that my design is on top of my boxes. Select both of these, open the modify panel and choose subtract. Now make sure you group all that back together. And that is going to give you, in my opinion, very good results. So what you're going to do, let me show you how this works. Let me fill this in. If I fill that in red, you know what? Let's do just some black letters. Can you see how what'll happen is I'll be able to weed out these smaller pieces? And I like that, especially in design like this. I really stress when I have to weed part of a design that is over letters and in between letters, and I feel like I really have to keep an eye on it and make sure that everything's working itself out. So even though this will cause ultimately more work when I'm weeding, what that means is that I can do this in pieces and come in here, and what will be left is this part that's in white. All right. Now, I promise I'm going to show you what this looks like when it's weeding. That way, you can really think about what's going to work best for you. I'm not saying that you always need weeding lines and you don't always need weeding boxes, but it's something to remember, especially when you're dealing with a design like this, especially, like I said, if it's a larger piece of vinyl, it becomes more of a handful to try to contain all of the vinyl and be able to keep it from sticking back down and ruining your design. So That is the manual way of creating your own weed lines and weed boxes. So whichever way works best for you, completely up to you. You can let the software do it, or, if you have that business edition upgrade, or you can get in the habit of doing them yourself. But whatever you do, please do not be afraid to take advantage of these weeding line options, because it's one of those things that once you get in the habit, at least a weeding box, guys, if you can get in the habit of using a weeding box, then it just becomes second nature, and you will have much more success in cutting and weeding your designs. All right, guys, so here are our two designs. I did cut them both just so that you could see what they look like when you are weeding them. Now, this is the longer one that we drew the boxes for, and I'm just using a pair of fine tip weeding tweezers. And as you can see, it's going to slowly pull around the bottom of each word, and I'm just going to work my way up. Now, I personally still leave the smaller details for last. I try to go ahead and get the main part off. Now, every now and then with the boxes, you will get little straggler pieces. As long as they're not attached to your design, then that's completely fine. But if that's something that you experience when using boxes, you can actually just draw lines instead. Okay, so I think it's a little bit of personal preference. The boxes are easier and faster because you can duplicate them so quickly. But if you have problems with having the duplicate cutting, sometimes when you cut, because the box is cutting the bottom of this box and the top of the next box to it. So if you have any problems with that, then you can just simply draw lines instead of doing the boxes. So for the most part, you can kind of see what's going on here. Like I said, in the beginning, it does take a lot more time weeding wise. But ultimately, you can see where this is going. I'm just going to go back through and pull off all of the pieces. Overall, I'm just having an easier time of weeding without having to worry about, this large piece of vinyl kind of looming over my head, so to speak. And I can just keep going until I have weeded out all the pieces that I don't need. Okay, so let's take a look at this one. Now, this is the one that had the automatic weeding boxes courtesy of the software. So you'll still have to be able to, I don't want to say pay attention like something catastrophic is going to happen, but you do have to find where the boxes are. Does that make sense? Whereas here, I knew that each line, was going to be there. But here, I do have to find where each box is going to start. And not that it's like some crazy thing going on where it's going to be impossible to find, just that, something to keep in mind. This type of weeding box or weeding lines is just not as straightforward as using the boxes. So there we go. And then, you just go in and you weed out all the pieces that you don't need. Okay, so hopefully, and I know that I didn't finish these for you guys because there's a lot of details to go through, and I don't want to bore you to death, but just know that, each has its pros and cons, and but they both work really, really well, and they can really save you a lot of heartache with your projects. So guys, how did you feel about our weeding lines and weeding boxes? Of course, I think they are very useful, especially if you're struggling to weed your projects. And don't forget, they're also there to help you save your material and be more of a thrifty crafter. I love thrifty tips, so this was obviously one of my favorite ones to share with you guys. And of course, if you have any questions or comments or any other weeding tips that you'd like to share, you can definitely leave those in the comment area below. I love to hear from you guys. I love answering your questions. And of course, if you have any video requests, I love to hear those too, because I want to bring you guys content that you want to see. Now, if you don't mind, if you learned something from the channel, make sure to give us a like, share with a crafty friend, and subscribe to the channel, because all of those things help to keep us going so that we can keep bringing you these really awesome tutorials in the future. So I'm going to wrap it up for today, guys, but I do appreciate it. I appreciate you stopping by, and I appreciate you. Thanks again, and I will see you next time.